Chapter 1. The Noise Beyond the Wall. In the early spring of 2023, Minneapolis hovered between slush and thaw, the city caught in that restless pause before the arrival of real warmth. Inside a modest craftsman house in the Longfellow neighborhood, Hannah Wilson moved through her routines with the steady precision of someone long accustomed to repetition. At 35, she had found a life that felt dependable, if not exciting. Her mornings began with black coffee and grading papers, her afternoons with literature lessons in a public high school, and her evenings in a quiet kitchen where she cooked for two. Saturdays were for her aging parents in Eden Prairie. Sundays were for resetting everything to begin again. Her husband, Richard, worked in tech, software infrastructure mostly. He had a quiet, logical demeanor that suited his line of work. They had been married for nearly 8 years. Their conversations had become streamlined over time, efficient, friendly, and increasingly infrequent. She attributed this to the natural wear of marriage, to exhaustion, to the way routine dulls even the brightest edges. And yet, something had begun to shift in recent months. It wasn't something Hannah could name at first. A feeling, a subtle wrongness, like a misplaced frame in a familiar painting. It started with the sounds. She began waking in the middle of the night to muffled movements, an almost imperceptible creak in the hallway, the soft click of a door handle, laughter so faint it might have been her own memory misfiring. The first few times, she blamed the furnace, the wind, perhaps the neighbors. But then came the scent. Perfume, warm, floral, and unfamiliar, lingering near the linen closet in the upstairs hall. The smell would fade by morning, and Richard, when asked, shrugged it off as a co-worker's cologne he must have brushed against. Still, she watched more closely. Her instincts, dulled by years of domestic predictability, began to reawaken. She noticed how Richard kept his phone face down now, how he had recently changed his lock screen passcode. She told herself it meant nothing. Everyone deserved a private corner of their life. But doubt, once given shape, grows quickly. One quiet Sunday morning, just after 6, she slipped from bed while Richard slept beside her. They had planned to leave at 8 to visit her mother, who had recently had a minor surgery. Hannah wanted to check the weather forecast to time the drive and decide whether to bring the snow chains. Her own laptop had died the week before, so she lifted the lid of Richard's MacBook, still open from the night before. His desktop loaded instantly. A few open tabs blinked to life. Email, news, some code. She typed Weather Minneapolis into the browser bar, then paused. A folder in the corner of the screen caught her attention. It was titled with a meaningless string of letters and numbers, like the kind backup services assign by default. She opened it without thinking. Inside were hundreds of thumbnails, automatically synced images, likely from his phone. She clicked one, then another, and another. The breath caught in her throat. The images were unambiguous. A woman with long blonde hair. Her sister's necklace. Her sister's wrists. Her sister's face. The location was undeniable. Sunlight slanting across their bedroom in the same angle it did each morning. The edge of their bed frame. The familiar folds of their duvet. The photos weren't explicit, not all of them. But they were intimate, private, documented over time. Some were selfies, some were candid, and all of them, taken with her husband's phone, lived here now, in this digital folder she had never meant to find. Hannah closed the screen. She sat still for a long time, the room quietly brightening around her. Birds stirred outside the window, and the soft hum of the refrigerator kicked in downstairs. In the bedroom, Richard shifted slightly, turning toward the wall. She heard the faint sigh of his breath. She didn't cry. Not then. Instead, she folded the moment inward like paper, sharp and small, and set it deep inside her. Later, when the time came, she would open it again. But for now, she sat in the glow of the screen, listening to the house breathe around her, and began to make a plan. Chapter 2. The Shadow Beneath the Skin. Hannah said nothing. Not that morning, not that week, not even to herself. She closed Richard's laptop, erased the browser history with a practiced calm, and made breakfast. Scrambled eggs, toast with raspberry jam, black coffee. She set the plates on the table and smiled when he walked into the kitchen, tousled and half awake. He kissed her cheek. She didn't flinch. Her body moved out of habit. But inside, something delicate and essential had cracked. Not with a roar, but with a whisper. A quiet hairline fracture deep beneath the surface. The silence became her armor. She watched. She trained herself to notice patterns she had once overlooked. When Lily visited, Hannah paid attention. She saw how Richard avoided meeting her eyes too directly, how he laughed too easily at her sister's jokes, how Lily lingered in the kitchen long after dinner, offering to help clean up when she never used to. Sometimes, Hannah caught the faint scent of Lily's perfume hours after she'd left, clinging to the hallway air like a question no one wanted to ask. Hannah began gathering evidence, not with rage, but with precision. She remembered Richard's iCloud password. It hadn't changed in years. At night, when he drifted into sleep beside her, she opened his backups. The messages told stories without speaking, fragments of phrases, inside jokes, shared locations, screenshots of hotel reservations under fake names, but charged to their joint account. She traced the addresses, matched dates with her own work schedule. Everything aligned with an awful, mechanical neatness. There were photos. Not many, but enough. A restaurant booth she had once sat in with Richard, now featuring Lily, a wine glass tilted in her hand, her mouth caught mid-laugh. A pair of shoes Hannah recognized instantly as her own, placed at the foot of the guest bed. But the figure lying on the mattress wasn't her. She scrolled through each image with a stillness she hadn't known she possessed. She saved them to a private folder, hidden in the depths of a drive he would never think to check. She didn't cry. Except once. It happened late one night, well past midnight. The house was silent, lit only by the cool glow of the screen. She was scanning a video taken from Richard's phone, a short clip just a few seconds long. Lily, standing on the back terrace, wearing Hannah's robe, her hands wrapped around the same mug Richard had given her on their third anniversary. The terrace was bathed in golden evening light, exactly like it had been the night Richard knelt down and proposed. Hannah paused the video. Her breath hitched, unsteady, caught in her throat like a sob that refused to rise. It wasn't the betrayal alone that broke her in that moment. It was the stealing, the erasure, the quiet, casual replacement of her life's most sacred memories by someone who shared her blood. She shut the laptop and sat in the dark, hands folded tightly in her lap. Her pulse throbbed in her ears, but her face remained dry. It was not grief that settled in her chest, but something colder, cleaner. From that night forward, Hannah stopped thinking in terms of confrontation. There would be no shouting, no imploring for the truth she already possessed. Her pain no longer sought expression. It demanded strategy. This wasn't heartbreak. This was sharpening. Chapter 3. The setup. Their father's 70th birthday approached with the kind of momentum that families reserve for milestones. Relatives began calling weeks in advance, coordinating flights, debating gifts, offering to bring desserts. There were cousins from Texas, an uncle from Oregon, and Hannah's aunt from Florida, who hadn't attended a family event in over a decade. The idea of gathering everyone under one roof filled her mother with both excitement and anxiety. Hannah offered a solution. Why not host the dinner at her and Richard's house? It was logical. Their home was spacious, centrally located, and familiar to most of the family. Her parents had celebrated anniversaries there. Nieces had played in the backyard, and Christmas stockings still hung from their mantelpiece each year. Hannah presented the idea casually, over lunch with her mother, who lit up with gratitude. Everyone agreed it was a wonderful plan. Hannah mapped it all in her mind with the care of someone setting a stage. The evening would be warm, autumn settling over Minneapolis in rust-colored leaves and the faint scent of chimney smoke. The dining table would be extended to its full length, covered in linen, candles flickering beside polished silverware. She would cook the main course, her father's favorite roast, and coordinate the rest through relatives. Laughter would fill the rooms. Children would run barefoot through the hallway. And then, at the right moment, the lights would dim. Lily volunteered to help. Her voice, light and enthusiastic, crackled through the phone as she offered to arrive early to prep hors d'oeuvres and decorate. She even suggested creating a photo slideshow, childhood memories, old vacations, images from their father's early years. Hannah agreed with a smile in her voice and steel in her gut. Richard, too, offered assistance. He said he'd manage the projector, the sound, the lighting cues. He'd always handled tech at family functions. No one questioned it. Hannah let him believe it would be like every other year. Simple, joyful, safe. What neither of them knew was that the slideshow wasn't just a slideshow. Hannah had spent 2 weeks curating the photos, selecting every frame with care. There were beach trips from the late 80s, birthday parties in basement rec rooms, pictures of their father holding his grandchildren. She wove the images into a gentle visual timeline, backed with soft music, and a few old video clips from VHS tapes she had digitized. This would be the first presentation. Nostalgic, sweet, the kind that brought people to tears for all the right reasons. But embedded within the projector's playlist was a second file. She named it innocuously, something no one would think to open. Dad Archives, in 1970, 2023, DEM-P4. It sat in the same folder as the slideshow, with a thumbnail showing an old photo of their father in a baseball cap. It looked harmless. It wasn't. Hannah had embedded the incriminating content deep in the middle of that second file. The evidence she had collected, texts, images, timestamps, footage, had been assembled with clinical precision. Each element appeared as part of a fabricated anniversary montage, something designed to blend seamlessly with the theme. The transition from celebration to betrayal would be subtle, almost imperceptible at first, until it wasn't. She had practiced the timing in secret, running the projection late at night while Richard slept. She made notes about seating arrangements, who would be in the living room, who'd be near the screen, who'd have the clearest view of Lily's expression when the truth came into focus. Her father would sit at the head of the table, wineglass in hand. Her mother would be nearby, dabbing at her eyes with a napkin. Richard and Lily would be across from one another, just close enough for their shared panic to be visible to everyone. Hannah rehearsed the moment in her mind like a play. The lights would dim at exactly 8:15. She would rise from her seat, say a few words about legacy, about memory, about truth. Then the screen would come to life. She didn't imagine chaos. She imagined stillness, one of those long silences that swallows a room whole. She imagined Richard's face, the flush rising in his neck. She imagined Lily, blinking too quickly, her hands suddenly without purpose. And in that moment, when every lie hovered exposed in the electric hush, Hannah would simply stand there, calm, knowing. She had set the stage. All that remained now was the performance. Chapter 4. Not Your Sister. The dining room was warm with candlelight and the gentle murmur of conversation. Plates had been cleared, replaced by slices of cake and cups of coffee. The scent of cinnamon and burnt sugar hung in the air. People leaned back in their chairs, loosened ties, refilled their glasses. Laughter moved easily across the table. It was a rare gathering, filled with the glow of shared memory and the comfort of routine. Everything looked exactly as it should. Hannah stood. She smiled softly and raised her glass to catch attention. Her voice, calm and measured, cut through the chatter. She said she had prepared something, a small surprise, a tribute to the family, to their father, to the decades that brought them here. Guests applauded gently as the lights dimmed and the projector hummed to life behind them. The first images were familiar and safe. Faded photographs of their father as a boy, splashing in a creek. A wedding portrait in black and white. The three siblings lined up in Halloween costumes from the early 90s. the room filled with warm laughter, sighs, fond murmurs of, "I remember that," and "Look at your hair." Children pointed at their younger selves. Parents wiped at their eyes. Then the screen flickered. The music faded. The slideshow paused on a black frame. At first, no one reacted. They assumed it was a glitch. But then text appeared, white against the dark. A short phrase, bold and quiet. "Sometimes family hides more than it shows." Another image followed, a screenshot, a text exchange, brief, casual, between two contacts, Richard and Lily. The content was mundane at first, but the tone intimate. Another slide, a photo of a hotel confirmation, dated and paid for with Richard's card. The location matched a weekend Lily had claimed to be visiting a friend out of state. Then a map ping, GPS coordinates from a shared location app, placing them both 3 blocks from the Wilson home that same night. A low murmur passed through the room. Chairs shifted. Someone coughed. More images filled the screen. Lily, seated at the kitchen counter, barefoot, wearing Hannah's robe. A time-stamped video, grainy black and white, captured from a discreetly installed camera above the back door. It showed Lily leaving the house just after sunrise, hair still damp, purse slung over one shoulder. Her car pulled away moments later. The metadata below the footage stated the date clearly, one that Lily had insisted she spent in Chicago. And then, the final clip. The frame opened on the familiar kitchen, sunlight streaming through the east-facing windows. Richard stood at the counter, pouring coffee. Lily entered the shot from the right, smiling. He reached for her hand. She leaned in. His mouth met hers. The kiss was not brief. It was not platonic. It was slow, practiced, familiar. The room went silent. Utterly, completely silent. No one spoke. No one moved. Even the children, sensing a sudden shift in the air, froze. A wine glass slipped from their mother's fingers and shattered against the hardwood floor. She didn't flinch. Her eyes were fixed on the screen. Lily's face turned pale. Her hands dropped to her lap, fingers twitching. Richard sat motionless, the color drained from his face. A cousin turned away. Hannah remained standing, arms at her sides, expression unreadable. The screen faded to black. The room stayed in that suspended stillness, time stretching thin. No one rushed to speak, to fix it, to fill the vacuum. Because there was nothing to say. The evidence had already spoken. The betrayal had already been witnessed. And in that quiet devastation, the truth settled over them like ash. Chapter 5. Ash. The silence lingered long after the screen went dark. Chairs creaked as people shifted, uncertain of what to do with their hands, their eyes, their presence. The room felt stripped bare, as if the air itself had turned brittle. Richard opened his mouth once, then again, but no sound came. He looked toward Hannah, searching her face for permission, for softness, for something he no longer had access to. She didn't look at him. She had already stepped away from the gathering, moving with deliberate calm through the hallway and up the stairs. In the bedroom, a small suitcase waited, already packed. She had filled it the day before, folding each item carefully, selecting only what she knew she would need. Clothes, documents, her laptop, the ring box that no longer held meaning, her passport, a sealed envelope with instructions for her lawyer. There was nothing impulsive about her departure. It had been choreographed with the same quiet discipline she had used to expose the truth. She walked past Richard as he followed her outside, his voice finally breaking through, trembling, pleading, defensive. She didn't answer. She didn't stop. The car was parked 2 blocks away. She preferred it that way, distance between the front door and her exit. She drove without music, without a single backward glance. The house disappeared in the rearview mirror like a set piece after the final curtain. The apartment was small but sunlit, perched on the second floor of a brownstone, with ivy growing along its brick side. She had signed the lease 2 weeks earlier under her maiden name. The keys felt heavy in her palm. Final. Within hours, her belongings were neatly arranged in the space. She didn't unpack the photos. She didn't bring any framed memories. Lily didn't call. She didn't text. There were no apologies, no denials, no late-night messages. Nothing. The silence between them stretched like a fault line, wide and irreparable. Some relatives sent cautious messages, vague expressions of support, non-committal offers to talk. Most said nothing at all. A few unfriended her without explanation. Her mother left 2 voicemails. The tone was strained, clipped, full of discomfort masquerading as concern. She urged Hannah to be reasonable, to think of the family's reputation, to avoid making things harder than they already were. She asked her not to cause a scene. There was no mention of betrayal, no acknowledgement of what had happened, just the same instinctive urge to smooth over everything with silence. 3 days after the dinner, Hannah filed for divorce. Her lawyer submitted the paperwork efficiently, without ceremony. She declined spousal mediation. She didn't request the house. She didn't want it. She deactivated her shared accounts, canceled joint subscriptions, removed herself from group chats. She changed her number. In every way that mattered, she severed the cords that once tethered her to a life built on illusion. The only trace she left behind was a single post. It appeared late one evening on her social media page, framed in muted tones. A photograph of the house, their house, taken from across the street at dusk. The porch light was on, curtains drawn. The caption read, "Sometimes betrayal doesn't break the heart, it clears the room." The post gathered over 3,000 likes in 48 hours. Strangers commented with quiet support. Friends reposted it with hearts. There were no messages from Richard, none from Lily. The silence this time belonged to Hannah, and it felt clean. Chapter 6. In a New Body. A year had passed. Seasons had come and gone with quiet certainty, each one folding neatly into the next. The city had changed in subtle ways, new buildings rising, old ones fading, sidewalks repaved, storefronts renamed. But the real change had taken place in Hannah, quiet and internal, reshaping her from the inside out. She no longer lived in the neighborhood where everything had broken. She had sold the apartment without ceremony and moved to a lakeside district on the edge of the city where the air smelled of pine and open water. The house she chose was small, with sloping eaves and pale blue shutters. It had a screened porch, a garden, and just enough space for solitude to feel like sanctuary instead of exile. She painted the walls herself. She planted lavender near the mailbox. She slept with the windows open. She changed her last name, legally and permanently. The process was brief, just paperwork, a waiting period, and a signature. But the feeling that came with it was deeper, like unzipping a skin that no longer fit and stepping out into something unwrinkled and clean. She no longer used the initials embroidered on old stationery. She left no forwarding address. Each Tuesday afternoon, she hosted a reading group at the local community center, a small wood-paneled space with chipped tables and folding chairs. The club was her own creation, open to teenagers from difficult homes, kids with eyes that darted around the room like they were waiting for something to fall. She brought books that once saved her, fiction with characters who endured, stories that made sorrow feel survivable. They read slowly, talked freely, and stayed late. Sometimes they didn't read at all. Sometimes they just needed a place to sit and be. In the evenings, Hannah walked along the edge of the lake with a journal tucked under her arm and headphones in her ears. She stopped often, at benches, under trees, near the footbridge, to jot down thoughts. Some were memories. Some were fragments of poems. Some were lists of things she no longer missed. The quiet was different here. It didn't hum with tension or hide sharp edges. It just was. She didn't speak about what happened, not to the other volunteers at the center, not to the quiet man who sold her coffee each morning, not even to herself. The past existed like an old scar, visible but no longer tender. She had not forgiven. Forgiveness had never been the goal. What she found instead was space. And space, it turned out, was its own kind of healing. There were no cameras in her new house, no hidden lenses, no apps syncing to secret folders. Not because she trusted again, but because there was no one inside who required surveillance. That absence felt safer than any device ever could. She no longer lived in fear, not of betrayal, not of silence, not of endings. Everything she had once feared had already happened, and it hadn't destroyed her. It had made room